Hello, good people, and welcome to Hillbilly Cat History Spiritual Quest. And today we're going to be entering chapters 8 of the book of John and the Impersonal Life. Hi, Gun. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate seeing you here. We're going to start with this song, which describes Elvis walking through the very text that we will read, which is Word on Fire. Thank you for gathering here at Hillbilly Cat History, where we remember together and listen for the echoes. And today we're going to hear echoes from someone we've never heard from. So let's take a look Well, first, let me say Merry Christmas to Gun, Lorna, Pat, Emma, and Jen. Thank you so much for coming today. And let's take a look at this special item that I found, which is a crucifix, because it's a cross that has a depiction of Jesus on it. It's a depiction of the crucifixion, which is when Jesus gave his life to pay for the sins of all mankind. And this is a crucifix which Elvis owned, but we don't have a lot of provenance on it. What we do have comes from a man named Jeremy Elvis Perch. And so the Elvis in his name usually has quotes around it, which I assume means he's a big fan of Elvis, and that's what a lot of people call him. They associate him with Elvis, and they call him Jeremy Elvis Perch. And I believe he owns the EP Mobile Museum. So he owns a collection of Elvis stuff, kind of like Jimmy Velvet, or kind of like Dr. Nick did at one point. And he travels around and he takes these to different places. And then people in these various locations, they can see things that Elvis owned. And it's still running today because they have a presence on eBay right now. You could go out and purchase little pieces of things like swatches of material and pieces of various places that Elvis was at. It's kind of odd. It's not exactly Elvis stuff, but it is. And they've got this presence out there right now on eBay. So is this really a crucifix that was owned by Elvis? Well, the description is this original cross hung on Elvis's wall. Now, they don't tell us where it hung. I don't know the location. I don't know which wall. I don't even know which building. I think he's trying to imply that this was at Graceland, and maybe it was. But we don't know how it left the wall and how it made it into this traveling museum. And so we've each got to decide for ourselves if this crucifix belonged to Elvis. But it does say that Elvis is closely associated enough with these spiritual and religious ideas that when people see this crucifix, they have no problem connecting this to Elvis. And let us now return to the book of John. Although this isn't quite the book of John, this is a story that is not told in John, but it is told in another gospel of the Bible. John's the fourth book of the New Testament. There's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And this was told in one of those other gospels. And it's going to catch us up to where we need to be to enter chapter 8. And this is a comic book panel from 1942. Elvis would have been about 7 years old when this comic was published. He may have seen it. I can't guarantee that he did. But this is the kind of comic book that a lot of adults would have bought to keep around to show to children. It would have had a long lifespan on both the shelves where it was sold and the shelves at home. You know, when your mom threw away all your comic books, she might have not thrown away this one. This probably wasn't one you traded to anybody else if you had it, because it wasn't really good trading material. Kids were looking for superheroes and westerns and stuff like that. So if you got it, it probably stayed at your house for a long time. If your friend had it, it was probably always there every time you went over. Good chance, I think, that Elvis would have seen this or something very similar to help his child imagination connect to the scriptures. And I think it definitely helps us to envision what is being told to us in the stories. But this says, as Jesus and his disciples go to Caesarea, which I believe must be named for Caesar, who is the ultimate control at this period of time. Right now, it would be Tiberius Caesar, I believe. But Augustus Caesar was ruling when Jesus was born. But this says Caesarea Philippi, and Jesus asked, who do men say that I am? And he asked this of his 12 disciples. Some of the disciples say that people say Jesus is John the Baptist. Now we got to remember that wasn't any internet back in Jesus's day, weren't even any newspapers, wasn't any telephone or telegraph. The only way that news got around is that a person traveled somewhere and they took the news. The news of Jesus is traveling around just as the news of John the Baptist is traveling. And these people who have never met either one, well, when they hear of one, they think of the other, and they're saying, oh, this must be the same guy we've already heard of that's baptizing everybody. John the Baptist, Jesus Christ, these must be the same guy. And that's what they're telling back to the disciples, or that's what the disciples are hearing. And one of the disciples says, they say you're Elijah, who was a prophet. So they believe he is a returned prophet or a reflection of Elijah, so he is a prophet. And another disciple says, they say you're Jeremiah or one of the prophets. So there's a confusion among the people. They think maybe he's a prophet from of old come back, but they definitely recognize that he's touched by God. They're not necessarily recognizing he's the Son of God, but they haven't actually seen him. And Jesus says, but whom say ye that I am? So he asked the disciples, who do you think I am? And one of the disciples, I believe this is Peter, he says, thou art the Christ and the Son of the living God. So this is a moment when the inner circle is asked to declare loyalty to Jesus. He's asking, do you think that I'm tricking you and saying that I'm someone that I'm not? Do you think I am one of these other people, as you've been told by others? Who do you perceive that I am? And they're answering that they know that he's the Christ. He's the Son of the living God. We've seen this before because a lot of people left Jesus at one point. And he asked the disciples, are you going to leave me too? And Peter said, where would we go? You're the one that's bringing truth and light. We recognize the truth and light. And in this panel, it says, upon this rock, I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And so this rock that he's talking about It's Peter. Peter and his faith and the faith of the other disciples. Faith that is not shaken by the words of others, by the doubts of others. Faith that may be shaken by internal doubt, but is held on to. And Jesus, he's looking at Peter, who he calls the rock. And he says, upon this rock, I'll build the church. And so this is all a message of loyalty, which we know was very important to Elvis. Elvis had an inner circle. Elvis wanted them to be loyal to him. He tried to return that loyalty. Now, Elvis wasn't Jesus, so he could not be perfect in his return of loyalty and love the way that Jesus could be with his disciples. But I think we've seen massive amounts of generosity and love showered by Elvis upon his inner circle. Although they will also tell us stories of times when he was not like Jesus. And in this panel, Jesus begins to teach his disciples that Jesus must suffer and be killed, and the third day rise again. So this is the panel where Jesus reveals his secret plans. What's going to happen. He tells them about the future and how painful it's going to be. I think this panel might have been reflected in Elvis's life when he would gather his circle and tell them about an upcoming project. Upcoming projects are fun, but they're also full of suffering and pain. You got to do some work to pull these things off. Everyone has to come together. Got to be a team. Got to be mentally ready for that. Now, is Elvis preparing his people to go to a concert or to start a series of tours? Is that comparable to Jesus telling the disciples about the crucifixion? Well, obviously not in importance, no. But the example of Jesus' life is given to us so that we can compare it for reflections in all of our lives, because all of our lives are reflected in Jesus, and Jesus is reflected in all of our lives. And that's kind of what we're pulling out in this series. And this panel says Peter takes Jesus aside to say, "Be it far from thee, Lord, this shall not be." So Peter's telling Jesus he hopes this is far in the future and that this can't be, that Peter does not want this to happen. Peter is struggling against this. So if we were to bring in the impersonal life, it would be telling us in this moment, although Peter is an aligned individual, one of the most aligned that we'll ever know, he struggles against the teachings of Jesus. He says, "No, I will not accept this. This shall not be." And Jesus says, "You are thinking of the things of men, not of the things of God, Peter." So Jesus is telling him that he's allowing his secular brain, the part that keeps the body of Peter alive, the part that's very important for survival in the world that that Jesus and Peter find themselves in at this moment, the physical world. And Jesus is telling him all of that is in the way of your alignment. You must be still and know I am God. And Jesus tells him this by saying, you are thinking of things of men. You are using your secular brain, not of the things of God. You are not listening to the I am. You are not in communion. You are facing Jesus because Peter is in alignment. We know this. But you have closed your eyes and ears to the message that is coming through, which is the first step to turning away and misaligning. Hi, Anna. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate seeing you here. Merry Christmas. And Jesus says, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. So Jesus is telling the disciples, if you want to follow me, if you want to be with me, you have to deny yourself. Well, what does that mean? It means you must stop listening to your secular brain. That's what the impersonal life is telling us. You've got this self, this personality is the word that the impersonal life uses. You've got a personality that keeps getting in the way. That's the self you have to deny. And once you've denied it, you've taken away its power, because that's what the impersonal life tells us, that we fill with power these pieces of ourselves which interfere with the communion. And so if you take that power out of that piece of yourself, it doesn't have any power. You denied power to yourself, your personality. And then it says, take up his cross. That's alignment. Alignment is not necessarily an easy thing. It can be a burden. It's a burden to remain aligned. It's work. You got to take up the cross. It's not a passive act. And then you have to follow. That's the listening part. Peter is aligned. He's picked up the cross. He's looking at Jesus. But then when the message comes that he doesn't like, he closes his ears and eyes. Stops following. He's pointed in the right direction, but his feet stop working because he doesn't want to hear the message. And Jesus says, for what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? So I don't know if you guys remember this, but early on in this series, and we're 49 episodes into this series at this point, so it's been a little bit, we saw that Elvis wrote this very quote, for what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? This is a verse that we know speaks directly to Elvis because he has written it with his own hand into other books. He thinks about this verse. He's gained the whole world, most likely, when he's writing these verses. He gained the whole world in 1956. Gathered it all in 57. Retook it in 60. So he's got the whole world. And he's wondering, have I lost my own soul? And Gunn is asking, Jesus is Jesus and God is God? Or No, they're both one. It's part of the Trinity. Jesus is God. God is Jesus. They're both the Holy Spirit. Now, God has separated this part of himself, which we see here as Jesus. He's expressed himself through a mortal body, through a mortal woman who was Mary, much like a poet will write a poem on a piece of paper. The ink of the pen and the paper are the medium, the expression of the poem. But he could express it in other ways, like through a computer. You could type it in. You could type it with a typewriter. You could recite it aloud. These are all expressions of the same idea of the poet. In this case, it's a mortal person in the form of Jesus. Now, the difference between the other humans that we see in the picture and Jesus is that each of the humans, like ourselves, is a shard of the divine. We express a single piece of the divine, each of us alone. Jesus expresses all of the divine at once. He is all of the divine, the perfect expression of the word, which is also something that we're told in the impersonal life God is moving towards. But what we should remember is that God does not experience time. So what he is moving towards and what has already happened and what we know of as now, these are all simultaneous for God. So it could be that Jesus was the perfect expressed word that the impersonal life says we're moving towards. Or it could be talking about when he returns. It's also speaking about the great unity, when we will all recognize that we're part of the union, and we will all face alignment rather than away from alignment, and that will bring us all into the unity. We've never left. We can't even move away. We can simply have a delusion that we are. And that delusion is we face the wrong way and we try to run away from God. And Gunn says that sometimes they mix these two, and even when they talk about it in the impersonal life and in the Bible, but that Jesus is God's son is what Gunn has learned. That's true as well. In another sense, all of mankind is God's son. So all of these words, that this is part of the issue with the interpretation of the Bible itself, and of the impersonal life, and of the annotations that Elvis writes. They're all three written with words of purposely multiple meanings. They have been picked purposely to have depth of meaning, so that you can start at one depth and you can continue to sink down into meaning. And every time you read the words, they may tell you something different. Elvis was very attracted to this mode of expression. And I believe it's because that's the way lyrics in songs tend to work. And then when Elvis would interpret the lyrics through his own voice in his performance, he would add additional layers of meaning. And Gunn says that sometimes Jesus says, "My Father," and sometimes he talks like he is God. Exactly. He's both. It's not something we're supposed to understand. We're supposed to know it and accept it on faith, but it's known by God that we will not understand it. somewhat like the Impersonal Life tells us as we're reading through the book. You're not going to understand what I'm saying here either, but it's okay. Just keep on reading. And in this panel, after 6 days, Jesus takes Peter and James and John and he leads them to a high mountain apart to pray. So Jesus picks 3 of the 12 disciples and they go to do something special together. And as Jesus prays, his countenance is altered and his raiment becomes glistening. The perception of the disciples is altered in this moment alone with Jesus as they see his love pour forth during his communion with God. I believe what's happening is that Jesus is modeling for these 3 men what true meditation and prayer should feel like. He's doing it in a visible form. They can see it, but they're meant to learn how it should feel. And that way they can pass that knowledge on to other sheep in the flock. Hi, Lorna. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate seeing you here. I'm seeing your comment about the chestnuts. I think you've already been here. I've already said hi, but the chestnuts. I was watching like this video yesterday, and they were talking about chestnuts. So that's fun. I've never had chestnuts myself. In this panel, as the disciples watch, Moses and Elijah appear with Jesus. Now, I have no idea how the disciples recognize Moses and Elijah. But these are 2 great spiritual leaders who have now appeared with Jesus in front of them. And Pat says she's never tried chestnuts either. When I saw them in that video yesterday, they're much larger than I would have thought they were. They're very large. Now in this panel, it says Moses and Elijah appear with him, which is what we just saw. But at the bottom, we can now see the reactions of the 3 disciples. Peter cries, "Lord, let us make 3 tabernacles, one for thee, one for Moses, one for Elijah." These 3 disciples, they are awed by what they see. And then in this panel, a voice from the cloud says, "This is my beloved son. Hear him." These 3 disciples are blessed to hear the voice of God, which tells them that Jesus is truly his son, that their faith has been well placed, and it's being rewarded in this moment of knowledge, and that their faith is the reason they're here at this moment. Peter is the rock, as Jesus has said, upon which he will build the church. And Jesus says, "Arise and be not afraid." And when they lift up their eyes, they see no man save Jesus only. So, did they share a delusion together? Were these other 2 individuals actually there? Did they hear this voice? Probably doesn't matter, because all 3 shared this experience. It's a real experience for them. Now, there is an experience that Elvis had that reminds me of this moment. And again, I would never compare Elvis to Jesus. Elvis is not Jesus. The disciples are not the inner circle of guys that Elvis kept around. But during his spiritual quest, Elvis desperately wanted to see a sign from God in the heavens. And one day, as they're driving back to Memphis or to Hollywood, I don't remember which, Larry Geller is with Elvis. And Elvis sees in the clouds different faces, which included Joseph Stalin and Jesus. But this experience, Elvis got out of the car or the motorhome, whatever they were driving. He cried on the side of the road. Larry was with him. Larry tells us about this experience in his book. And apparently, this touched Elvis deeply. And it doesn't really matter whether he really saw anything in the clouds or not. What matters is that the experience touched Elvis deeply, just as this experience touched the disciples, even though when they opened their eyes, there was no evidence of the experience. Much like seeing faces in a cloud, if you wait a couple of minutes, you won't see them anymore. They'll have moved on. And this panel says, as they come down from the mountain, Jesus says, "Tell no man till the Son of Man be risen from the dead." So Jesus is telling these disciples that as you preach the word, as you spread the word, and you tell them of your faith in me, don't tell them it's because God spoke directly to you. Don't tell them it's because you saw me with these other two spiritual leaders who are long gone. You could tell them about the miracles and stuff that we've shared together publicly. But this personal experience, this is for you three personally, not to be shared at this time. But there will be a time when you should share it. And he defines that time as after what will happen that he's already told them is going to happen, and that Peter has pushed back against and struggled against. And Emma says that she loved that part in Larry's book, and that it sounded like a beautiful moment. And Guns noting that J.D. Sumner thought that besides Jesus, Elvis was the best man he had ever met. That is true. J.D. did say that. And Emma says she has a similar experience. That's an Elvis shadow that appears on her bedroom wall. And her partner thinks she's nuts because it's an experience that only she had. But that is part of the spiritual journey. There will be experiences that you are not able to share with others. Others have to have their own experience. And Peter asked Jesus, why do the scribes say Elijah must come first? And Jesus says, Elijah has already come, but they knew him not, and they persecuted him. Likewise shall also the Son of Man suffer of them. So Jesus is noting that he's not the first prophet, let alone he is the first Son of God to come along, but he's not the first prophet to come to the Jewish people who they failed to recognize, at least in a public sense. Like their leaders don't recognize them the same way that the leaders, the Pharisees and the others at this moment, Herod, King Herod, and the Romans, they don't recognize Jesus as the Christ. They don't even acknowledge him as prophet. Everyone else acknowledges Jesus to be at least a prophet, if not the Son of God. Now, here, Jesus uses the Son of Man. And this is to link him to mankind. He is in human form. He is the Son of God, but he is also the Son of Man. He is linking us directly back to the divine. He is the opportunity for these shards of the divine to bask in the light of the full divinity. And this panel says, and going through Galilee, he tells how the Son of Man must be delivered and must suffer and rise again. But his disciples do not understand. He's been trying to tell them about the upcoming crucifixion over and over. And the do not understand part is the struggle. They struggle against what he's saying. They cannot accept it. This is part of the human condition. And Jesus understands their struggle. That's why he's continuing to tell them this message over and over. The I am in your heart will continue to say the message, whatever it's got for you, over and over and over. It's like a radio station that's constantly broadcasting. The question is whether you tune it in or not, or whether you let the competing broadcasts coming from more local stations, like the radio station that is your brain, your secular brain, interfere with the signal from the I am. But the I am's always there for you, and it's always broadcasting the signal. I think these are the things that comforted Elvis. That if he slipped away from alignment, he could come back. And that he's not going to miss an important message because it's going to be repeated for him, with the knowledge that he's not going to pick it up the first many, many times it's stated. And Gunn says that she thinks we all agree with JD. And that Elvis was a very, very giving person who modeled the attributes of Jesus in the 20th century that still reflects here in the 21st century. Now let's return to this book, Infinite Way Letters from 1958. This is a book that Elvis gave to Gary Pepper, his dear friend, who we together, and only here on this channel, Hillbilly Cat History, have uncovered through this next page that Gary was a participant in Elvis's spiritual quest, that they discussed spirituality together. This note from Elvis to Gary, written into the book, indicates this is not the first book Elvis has given to Gary about spirituality, that Gary liked the previous book. It hints at discussions that they had. Gary was not a person who could have discussions with many people because he was functionally dumb, meaning that he had great difficulty speaking. Only some people could understand what Gary said. Elvis had an uncle named Uncle Tracy. Uncle Tracy, for his entire life, had a speaking difficulty, which most people would have labeled him as dumb as well, which was a word that meant you could not speak. It was not an indication of your intelligence. Later, that word became linked to intelligence with the rather uneducated thought that if you could not speak, you must not be intelligent. Now, Uncle Tracy, he did view the world in a special way. It's different from what you or I would see it. But Gladys and Elvis, they understood what Tracy said. And Gladys and Elvis, they understood what Gary said. And Gary began his relationship with Elvis by gifting Elvis a Bible. First day he met him, never had met Elvis in person before, even spoken to him on a phone, anything like that. So Gary handed his faith to Elvis in a recognition that Elvis had the same faith and that they could share it together. And this note tells us that they did share faith together. And let's take a look at this page, where at the bottom, we can see a note written by Elvis Presley. And we'll read it first because that's what everybody would do when they got the book. We're all going to go through and look at what Elvis wrote first. And it says, power over one's mental state has the effect of healing. This is a reflection of what's told to us in the impersonal life, that we are cells of the divine, each of us, each shard of the divine that we are as a human. We are each a cell in the body of the divine, the great unity, because we are all part of a whole. And that all of our parts, our cells, reflect that greater divine order, that we are cells of the divine. And that if we are attuned to this and aligned, we will be able to have the control over our own cells, which God has over cells which are not divine shards. Divine shards means that we have free will, and we can determine for ourselves what we will do. Our cells do not have free will. In that way, we do not reflect the divine. The cells don't have free will, but we are surrounded by pieces of the divine that also don't have free will, like rocks and stones and water and air, all that great stuff that keeps us alive. It doesn't have its own divine will. But we're all part of this giant whole, and that those of us who have the free will, those of us who are divine shards, we can control our own cells and potentially others if we are aligned properly. That's what Elvis is saying here. Power over one's mental state, that's alignment, has the effect of healing. That's the ability to control the cells in your own body, or potentially the bodies of others. And Emma says that she loves the relationship between Elvis and Gary, that it's so heartwarming. And Gunn says she's so proud of Elvis taking time to talk to Gary because Gary needed it. And Elvis knew that Gary needed it. And I would say that's true because we've heard Vernon Presley tell us that when he chastised Elvis, that he gave away too much money to people who wanted things from him, Elvis said, "You see what they want. I see what they need." So Elvis did look to supply what people needed. He was a shepherd in that sense. And Gunn says Elvis knew Gary needed this contact and took his time with it. I think that's true. I also think that Elvis needed the contact with Gary. Elvis may have needed the contact with Gary more than Gary needed the contact with Elvis. And Emma says it shows how much of a kind and compassionate man he was. That's true. I think it also shows what a kind and compassionate man Gary was. Gary could be trusted with these inner thoughts of Elvis. He could be trusted to be compassionate back to Elvis with those thoughts, to be kind back to Elvis. So I think it shows the greatness of both men. And we all know that Elvis was great. There's no doubt, the whole world knows that. The one thing that I like to highlight is that Gary himself was great. Elvis surrounded himself with very extraordinary people. Even the ones we don't like were extraordinary people in their way. Now let's take a look at what this page is saying to us. And it says it's chapter 3, the practice of spiritual healing. So the note that Elvis has written obviously applies to this particular passage. And this passage says, to be successful in spiritual healing, it is necessary to come out and be separate, to adopt a clear principle from which there is no deviation. I believe what it's saying, that it's necessary to come out and be separate, is you have to separate your secular self so that you can align and hear the message properly. That's your clear principle from which there is no deviation. That's true north alignment. So this book is using words and ideas in a different pattern than we're used to in the impersonal life, but it's giving us some of the same, at the bottom, they're the same ideas. And Elvis says that, am I saying that Elvis needed Gary because Elvis was happy when he got to help someone, that it was good to help someone and he needed to help Gary? That's part of it. But I'm also saying that Elvis had his own internal wounds. He had his own doubts and his own fears, and that Gary helped Elvis to overcome those fears and doubts through this spiritual discourse. Now, we can't see what Gary has said back. And it could be that Gary has only indicated his own need and what he needs back from Elvis. And that's what we're seeing reflected here in this second, or perhaps third or fourth, or however many books there's been. There's only one other referenced in Elvis's note. Feels like this might be the second one he gave to Gary. So it could be simply to help Gary. But it could also be that Elvis is telling Gary where Elvis's own doubts are, and where he struggles himself. And then he's receiving support from Gary. This is how spiritual interactions work, especially amongst two men of faith, equals in faith. Gary is not a sheep that needs to be led to the path. He's already on the path. It's possible he's ahead of Elvis on the path. He's lived his entire life in deep suffering. Elvis has suffered in ways that we can all identify with, in a universal suffering pattern, which would be poverty, lack, unfulfilled desire, the loss of deep love, like with his mother. These are parts of the human condition. Gary suffers above and beyond that. He is trapped in a wheelchair with cerebral palsy. He cannot control his own body. And yet he has a deep and abiding faith in Jesus, which he communicates the very first thing to Elvis. I believe in Jesus. I know you believe in Jesus. Let us talk together about Jesus. That's what church is. So Elvis didn't get to go to church, but here there is at least some form of shared communion with a fellow man of faith. But more than a man of faith, a man who can follow Elvis into this journey, into this quest outside of Christianity, in an attempt to spread the love of God. And if this was, as I'm speculating, a shared spiritual dialogue between the two, it must have made Gary feel really good and important to be able to assist and support Elvis in his spiritual quest. And Gunn says she guesses Elvis had read more books than Gary. I would guess that too, although when he gave this book to Gary, I'm thinking Elvis had read very few. This is early in the quest. I can't guarantee that. I don't even know if there's books beyond this second one. What I do know is that in the last couple of years of Gary's life, Elvis ceases speaking with Gary. Elvis keeps him on the payroll. Gary comes every week to get his paycheck. Gary continues to love Elvis. And he declares his love for Elvis over and over, publicly, because he writes these missives, to the fan signs and such. But the deep spiritual conversations, if there were such, which I believe there must have been based on this evidence that we're looking at, those must cease entirely during 1976 and 1977. Now, we know a lot about a lot of other stuff going on in Elvis's life during those 2 years. But one thing that's not going on is a shared faith with Gary. And maybe there's other reasons that Elvis isn't speaking to Gary. But Larry also indicates that the last batch of Impersonal Life books he bought was around the same time. So it feels to me like in the last couple of years of Elvis's life, I would never say he turned away from God or that he turned away from reading the Bible. But I don't think he was focused on spirituality in the way that he was in previous years. There seems to have been two very heavy cycles of spiritual questing, one in the 60s and another in the early 70s. But by 76 and 77, he's not thinking about it as much. We know he's in a massive amount of pain. He's not speaking to Gary about any of these things. And I would open that up to speculation as to why he was no longer, if we just assume that nothing else happened between him and Gary. I'm not aware of anything that happened between him and Gary. But if you had this deep spiritual connection together, and you had stopped questing and maybe even felt you were being forsaken because you did have this pain that you were having difficulty dealing with, and yet here is your friend who's trapped in a wheelchair and suffering greatly, and his faith is still strong. You might shy away from those conversations. And I don't know if that's what happened or whether that didn't happen. All I know is that they weren't that Elvis was not seeking Gary out as he had in the past. Because we know Gary, from what we've read in the fan magazines, He's at Graceland a lot. At least before 76 and 77. And so does it have anything to do with the spiritual quest? It's way too early for us to know because we've just identified Gary's even in part of this. We knew Larry was. We knew Marty Lacker was to some point. We knew that Priscilla didn't like to be part of it. But we've never heard about Gary. That's where we've got to leave this episode for today. I do want to finish off this page when we come back. And I've still got more pages that Elvis has written on between him and Gary, and we can look at more of what they've said. And it could just be that Elvis is comforting Gary. It could be that Gary wrote things back to comfort Elvis, and we've just never seen them. Could be that they had long conversations. We know Elvis had long conversations with many other people who apparently had a much lesser understanding of these matters. And Tarzan asked, wasn't Elvis reading a spiritual book in the bathroom before he died? That story varies depending on who you speak to, but one of the popular ones is the Shroud of Turin. He was reading a book about the Shroud of Turin. But I'm going to leave you guys today with a song, and this song is He Carried Light, and it's about Elvis giving people a lantern so they can find their own path, and that's maybe what he was doing here with Gary. We know for sure he did it with others, with these same kind of quotes. And until I see you all again, hopefully at 3 p.m., I got a great Priscilla episode coming today. You all keep on taking care of business, but I'm going to read this last quote, last couple of comments I got. And Gunn says that no wonder Elvis had no peace reading books in the turbulent last years. We know what happened after his divorce and his health. You know, who would have time for words at a time like that? Yes, I think the last couple of years we do see Elvis in another searching pattern as we saw him when he began the Circle G. It's the beginning of a new cycle, and he has to wipe out the old cycle, but he's suffering with the physical issues, which is throwing the whole thing off. And then he just doesn't get a chance to enter the next spiral. Until I see you guys all again, you all keep on taking care of business. This is He Carried Light.
In the margins of the pages his voice still speaks, whispers of longing, of love that seeks. Lisa saw the notes, every thought, every prayer, a father's searching heart still breathing there. To do your will and my purpose he wrote, a bridge of devotion, a living note. Through the Bible's lines, through the books he kept, the light of his spirit forever swept. Like a bridge through the troubled night, he carried love, he carried light. Every word, every song, every plea was a path to unity. He showed the way and we will follow, through joy, through pain, through each tomorrow. The unseen hand, the guiding flame, love eternal in his name. To hell, the book with gold on its face, the impersonal life, his sacred place. Larry gave the gift, and Elvis was changed. New doors opened, horizons rearranged. He is within us at all times, he said. A chorus of hope where the faithful are led. Fans sent their prayers, the Bible's the song, and Elvis carried their faith along. Like a bridge through the troubled night, he carried love, he carried light. Every word, every song, every plea was a path to unity. He showed the way and we will follow, through joy, through pain, through each tomorrow. The unseen hand, the guiding flame, love eternal in his name. Show me the way and I will follow. His voice was a prayer through joy and sorrow. The road to seek and never ends. His journey became a gift to friends. From cousin to co-star, from friend to kin, the spirit he carried was shared within. I will sing his praises for all to hear, a song of salvation, a love sincere. Like a bridge through the troubled night, he carried love, he carried light. Every word, every song, every plea was a path to unity. He showed the way and we will follow, through joy, through pain, through each tomorrow. The unseen hand, the guiding flame, love eternal in his name. There's got to be a reason, he said, a purpose unseen, a life spirit led. And through the notes, the prayers, the song, his bridge of love still carries on.